Now, we were in the middle of discussing Chola administration. We had discussed the features of central administration, military administration, and revenue administration. Next, we need to talk about their provincial and finally local administration. Okay? Now, talking about the provincial administration, क्या पैटर्न देखने के लिए मिलता है हमें? That the empire was divided into several provinces known as mandalams. These were governed by royally appointed viceroys or governors. Viceroys were posted in areas that had been newly conquered, that were outside the core cultural zone of the Cholas, that is outside the middle Kaveri Valley. ठीक है? तो viceroys ज़्यादा मिलते हैं हमको, and governors are few, that is in the well consolidated regions of Chola control, वहां पे governors देखने के लिए मिलते हैं. डिफरेंस क्या है दोनों में? That viceroys are going to have more focus on military occupation. ठीक है? Whereas governors में civilian administration के ऊपर ज़्यादा फोकस होगा. The level of Chola authority is going to be greater in which areas? Those governed by viceroys or those governed by governors? Governors के areas में ज़्यादा consolidated power होगा. अच्छा. Below the mandalams or provinces were the districts known as Valnadus. Consisting of a number of nadus. Valnadus were also known as Kottams. Nadus were also known as Kurrams. Now, Nadus or Kurrams were essentially groups of villages clubbed together, and the lowest unit of administration was the village or gram, governed by a number of village assemblies that were locally elected. Now, while nadus and grams had been present in the deep south for a long period of time, the methods of governance had evolved gradually in an organic manner. The mandalams and valnadus were imposed from above. Okay? So they were the result of political reorganization imposed from above by the Chola rulers. Nadus and Kurrams on the other hand were, Nadus and Grams on the other hand were organic levels of administration. Okay? Now, why do you think the need was felt to undertake this kind of political reorganization? क्यों जरूरत थी? क्योंकि ये वाले जो levels थे, they were organically developed, and hence there was a strong element of autonomy. ठीक है. Now the emperor from his capital used to formulate a large number of policies. How to ensure that these policies are being transmitted to the lowest levels? तो कोई ना कोई और connecting levels चाहिए होंगे, and these were supposed to be the intermediary levels of imperial control. So the introduction of mandalams and valnadus is a manifestation of the centralizing tendency of imperial power, right? As the Chola rulers became more and more powerful, as they came in control of greater resources, their desire to introduce a higher levels of power over their core regions increased. They wanted to marginalize the local chiefs who were primarily in charge at the Nadu or Kurram level. तो इनकी autonomy को contain करना था. It was a zero-sum game between the local chiefs and the king. Is this much clear? Sure. Now, since the Nadus were groups of villages and the Chola period represented the second phase of urbanization, ultimately these Nadus also began to trade amongst each other, right? So, मान लो, this is one Nadu, this is another Nadu, this is another Nadu, this is another Nadu. Now, they are going to be connected with certain routes. So, in most cases, what would happen is that either one of them or a new settlement is going to emerge as a market town connecting this local economy. This market town was known as Nagaram. ठीक है. And अब हम बोल सकते हैं that a new level of administration has emerged known as the Nagaram. Now, has this been introduced from above or has this emerged from below? From below, right? So, once again, power at this level is going to be in the hands of which kind of officials? Royally appointed officials or organically grown officials? Local officials, right? Now, once again, powerful local officials are going to clash with the interests of centralizing tendencies, right? So they also need to be brought under control. तो उसके लिए भी कुछ changes किए जाएंगे, such as at the Nagaram level, for better coordination, first of all, royal officials are going to be given a supervisory role, and secondly, to dilute the power of the local elites, a new parallel elite is going to be created. And ये parallel elite कहाँ से emerge होगा? The Cholas also undertook a new practice at a large scale, that was making land grants to both temples as well as Brahmins. So through Devdan and Brahmadeya grants, a parallel elite was created to challenge the power or to balance the power of the local elite at the Nagaram level. The same strategy was also used to enhance royal control at the lower levels of administration as well. Okay? The Brahmins, because they were being patronized by the center, are always going to remain allied with the center. Okay? So they are going to play a very important role in the transmission of royal authority at the local levels of power. Is this clear? समझ में आया है? अच्छा, अब ये जो reorganization है, it was not possible in the early years of imperial Chola rule. It was only when the position of the king was strong enough that he was able to undertake this reorganization. In our last class, we had discussed that Raj Chola had undertaken a grand survey and measurement exercise, and the political reorganization of the Chola territories was an outcome of this survey and measurement. ठीक है? So this is a brief picture of the provincial administration of the Cholas. Clear है? Now what do you find? Essential element क्या है? Autonomy और centralization, local autonomy और centralization, mixture of both देखने के लिए मिलता है. ठीक है? Initially local autonomy was higher, centralization was lower. With the passage of time, increase in centralization, decline in local autonomy. However, the kings were never powerful enough, they could never afford to completely suppress local autonomy, and locally autonomous institutions continued to exist from the beginning to the end. तो अगर आपको कोई जजमेंट देना हो that was the Chola provincial administration highly centralized or not, क्या बोलोगे? नहीं था. There were strong centralizing tendencies, but centralization was not perfect. ठीक है? तो write down. हाँ जी. नाडूज एंड ग्राम्स इसके पहले क्या कर रहे थे? First of all, most of these nadus and grams were under the control of local chiefs known as valirs. ठीक है? Secondly, when it came to the revenue exercise, दो important tasks होते हैं, दो important processes होते हैं. Assessment और दूसरा collection. Before this political reorganization, both these tasks were being performed by local officials who were controlled by local chiefs. After this reorganization क्या होगा? ये जो assessment वाला power है, that is going to be taken over by the center. Collection would remain the right of the local officials, the local chiefs. ठीक है? So functionally हुआ क्या है? The amount of power exercised by the local chiefs at the local levels has declined. They have been brought more firmly under the control of the center. Secondly, politically also, these people enjoyed a great degree of autonomy. But after this reorganization, royal officials would be given a supervisory role in these regions. Okay? So they would act as a link between the central government and the local administration. Thirdly, with the enhancement of state revenues, state resources, the state was now in a power to give a large number of endowments. And because of this ability, the state was able to cultivate a new local elite to counterbalance the influence of the invested elite, the elite that was already present. And यहाँ पे किसके इंटरेस्ट को इन्होंने प्रमोट किया? Brahmins. So the Brahmins were used as an instrument of imperial centralization at the local levels by counterbalancing the influence of the Valids. In the peripheral regions, अब ब्राह्मण्स तो आप सेटल कर सकते हो मे बी इन दी ऑलरेडी वेल सेटल्ड रीजन्स व्हिच आर लार्जली पीसफुल, बट इन दी पेरिफेरल रीजन्स, दोज एरियाज व्हिच हैव रिसेंटली बीन ब्रॉट अंडर कंट्रोल, वहां पे ये बहुत ज्यादा सक्सेसफुल नहीं हो पाएंगे. दे मे बी चैलेंज्ड बाय द रिसेंटली सप्रेस्ड लोकल्स. तो इन दैट केस व्हाट आर द किंग्स गोइंग टू रिलाई अपॉन? Their military superiority, right? Military encampments known as Nilai Padai were entrusted to maintain peace in the newly suppressed regions, newly conquered regions. They were also given administrative duties. They were also put in charge of ensuring the safety and security of Chola temples that had recently been constructed in these regions, and also ensuring the safety of Brahmins which had been settled in these regions through land grants. ठीक है? तो through a combination of these methods, जो local autonomy है उसके ऊपर imperial control को establish किया जा रहा है. There were strong centralizing tendencies within the Chola Empire, but the power of these chiefs could never be suppressed completely. One of the major reasons for that you will have to understand is the structure of the Chola society. Now, Chola society was also a descendant of the Sangamate society. Sangamate society में हमने क्या देखा था? वर्ना system था, but the Varna system was not fourfold Varna system. It was twofold Varna system, consisting primarily of Brahmins and non-Brahmins. Now, generally in North India, हम क्या देखते हैं? That at the local level, the local collaborators or allies of the center were a combination of Brahmins and Kshatriyas. This is the case in North India, but in South India क्या है या क्या नहीं है? Kshatriyas नहीं है. ठीक है? Therefore, in South India, the main collaborators of the royal power, that is the Brahmins, they did not have any local ally. Therefore, they were forced to enter into an alliance with the local landed elites. ठीक है? तो जो rich land owners हैं, which are non-Brahmin, they could not be unseated from their status as elites. So they continued to be elites at the local level. तो इनके साथ अब collaboration compulsory हो गया था. And this is one of the reasons why complete centralization was not possible. Now, with the introduction of strong centralizing tendencies, the state needed locally entrenched allies, और वहां पे इन नॉन ब्राह्मण एलिमेंट्स का सपोर्ट एसेंशियल था. एंड एलिमिनेटिंग दीज एलिमेंट्स वुड हैव वीकेंड द सेंट्रल अथॉरिटी. ठीक है? तो दैट इज व्हाई दे हैड टू बी प्रिजर्व्ड. उनकी पावर को डिमिनिश करना जरूरी था, बट दे डिड नॉट हैव टू बी एलिमिनेटेड. इतना क्लियर है? ऑलराइट. Now, how is the problem of revenue appropriation and resource centralization going to be overcome in the situation when the traditional collaborators of the state are having to make a compromise with the local landed elites who do not necessarily agree with the ideological ranking given by this two-fold Varna system. कैसे रिकनसाइल किया जाएगा इसको? नहीं, वंस अगेन सोशल इंस्टीट्यूशंस का यूज किया जाएगा. हमने नॉर्थ इंडिया में क्या देखा है, जब वर्ना सिस्टम इज नॉट बीइंग एबल टू फुलफिल इट्स इकोनॉमिक रोल्स इन सोशल हायरार्की और सोशियो इकोनॉमिक रोल्स इन सेटिंग हायरार्की, तो एक नया इंस्टीट्यूशन इमर्ज होता है. व्हाट इज दैट? कास्ट सिस्टम, वही रैंकिंग वाला सिस्टम है. तो वंस अगेन, in order to overcome this, the Chola period is going to witness the proliferation of castes. ठीक है? And इस proliferation of castes में कुछ already existing tendencies थी. In South India, there was a tradition of dividing castes into two groups, Idangai and Valangai. Right? Now, among the new tribes which were being incorporated, en masse कुछ ट्राइब्स को इदंगाई स्टेटस दे दिया गया, कुछ कास्ट को वलंगाई स्टेटस दे दिया गया. आउट ऑफ दीज टू ग्रुप्स, which group enjoyed greater authority, greater respectability? The right-handed castes or the idangai, right? So by doing this, the Brahmins and the local elites had been able to marshal the support of another पावरफुल ग्रुप, दी इदंगई. ठीक है? एंड जो वलंगई थे, दे वर गिवन लोअर सोशल स्टेटस. ठीक है? नाउ व्हाट इज गोइंग टू बी द रिजल्ट ऑफ दिस? सोशल हार्मनी और डिसहार्मनी? सोशल डिसहार्मनी. ठीक है? And ultimately this social disharmony is also going to influence the politics. It is going to bleed over into the political and economic arena. What is going to be the result of this? Infighting का result क्या होता है ज्यादातर? Fragmentation, the deterioration of administrative control. And ये centralization के लिए helpful होता है या फिर हार्मफुल होता है? हार्मफुल होता है. So that is why if you have to plot a graph of levels of centralization, during the period of Chola rule, by analyzing the evolution of provincial administration, तो क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? In the beginning, almost no centralization or very low centralization. Then an increase in centralization, and then finally stagnation of centralized control with the emergence of a stable relationship between Brahmins and the local elites, and finally decline in centralization due to rising social conflict because of caste differences. ठीक है? तो ये एक इस तरह से आप उसको एनालाइज कर सकते हो. क्लियर? नाउ टेक डाउन अ फ्यू पॉइंट्स रिगार्डिंग प्रोविंशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. हाँ, that is very difficult to say whether royal orders were binding or non-binding. लेकिन इसमें आपको कुछ इंडिकेशंस मिल सकते हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, विद द पैसेज ऑफ टाइम द रिचुअल अथॉरिटी, द रिलीजियस अथॉरिटी एंजॉयड बाय द किंग, वो किस डायरेक्शन में जा रहा था, नीचे या ऊपर? ऊपर जा रहा था. व्हाई? बिकॉज द किंग्स हैड स्टार्टेड टू बी एसोसिएटेड विद डिवाइन इंस्टीट्यूशंस. उनकी खुद की इमेजेस और स्टैचूज अब टेम्पल्स के अंदर रखने लग गए थे लोग. न्यू टेम्पल्स वर बीइंग कंस्ट्रक्टेड ओवर द ग्रेव साइट्स ऑफ डेड किंग्स. ठीक है. Therefore, it appears that the power enjoyed by the kings at the local levels was constantly being enhanced. ठीक है. This is also borne out by the Uttaramerur inscriptions. Uttaramerur inscriptions में clearly mentioned है that royal officials are going to be present during the time of election. That if there is any dispute, तो अगर म्यूचुअल रेजोल्यूशन नहीं हो पाता है दो विलेज असेंबलीज में, तो रॉयल ऑफिशियल्स आर गोइंग टू आर्बिट्रेट. किंग वाज मेंशन्ड एज द फाइनल आर्बिटर ऑफ जस्टिस, एज द फाइनल यू कैन से जज इन ऑल केसेस. ठीक है. नॉट एनी लोकल ऑफिशियल और एनी लोकल असेंबली. फर्दर revenue centralization was being enhanced with the introduction of survey and measurement, with the introduction of royal officials. Emergency provisions were put into place. It was mentioned that in most cases the kings are going to adhere to the decisions of the village assemblies, but they have the right to intervene in order to protect the idea of dharma, right? So on this basis the kings were being able to interfere in the local issues. लेकिन बाद में हमको क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा, that because of the breakdown of administration, the authority of the king is going to functionally decline. तो आगे जाकर के हम देखेंगे एक डिबेट होता है in the nature of the Chola state. One historian, Bertenstein, gives a model known as the segmentary state model. Now segmentary state model में ये बोलता है that the king enjoyed two kinds of authority: real sovereignty and ritual sovereignty. Real sovereignty is going to be based on material factors such as military superiority, a large well-functioning bureaucracy, and a well-developed taxation system which has the ability to appropriate and channelize resources from the periphery towards the center. Ritual sovereignty is associated with the religious position of the king. In the society at large, and it becomes the main basis for administrative centralization. Bertenstein ने ये बोला that the Chola rulers had little real sovereignty and the real basis for their power was their religious position in the society. So the king was not a simple mortal human being, rather he was seen almost as a representative of God, and therefore the local elites, the peasants, the producers, everybody accepted the king's authority, and he said that this was the nature of the state from the beginning to the very end. ठीक है, बट अगर हम इस तरह से एनालिसिस कर रहे हैं तो एक सेपरेट रियलिटी इमर्ज होता है. ड्यूरिंग दिस फेज, जो पहला वाला फेज है, वहां पे बोथ रियल एंड रिचुअल अथॉरिटी आर लो. ठीक है, ड्यूरिंग दिस फेज real authority becomes enhanced, whereas the ritual authority remains stable. In this stage, real authority as well as ritual authority remains high. During this stage, real authority begins declining, but ritual authority remains stable. So kings are still considered as god kings, but local officials and chiefs are enjoying a greater degree of power. And this is the phase of disintegration, जहां पर open rebellions होने लग गए हैं and people have started to break away from imperial authority. That means both real as well as ritual authority are in a downward spiral. ठीक है, तो इसको इस तरह से भी एनालाइज कर सकते हैं. सो देयर इज नो सिंपल आंसर टू द क्वेश्चन दैट यू हैड आस्क्ड कि लेवल ऑफ रिचुअल अथॉरिटी क्या था. विद टाइम ये नोशन जो है चेंज होते जाएंगे. दे आर गोइंग टू फॉलो द पैटर्न ऑफ द और यू कैन से द एबिलिटी ऑफ द किंग्स टू एक्सरसाइज रियल अथॉरिटी. और इंडिया में ये आइडिया दैट रियल अथॉरिटी और रिचुअल अथॉरिटी सेपरेट होते हैं, दिस इज नॉट वैलिड एट ऑल. ठीक है, कभी भी नहीं है. दिस इज द पैटर्न ऑफ ऑल प्री इंडस्ट्रियल स्टेट्स इन इंडिया. रिचुअल अथॉरिटी इज ऑफन सीन एज अ पार्ट एंड पार्सल ऑफ द रॉयल अथॉरिटी, ऑफ द रियल अथॉरिटी ऑफ द किंग. ये हमको राजपूत पीरियड में भी देखने के लिए मिला, इनफैक्ट हमको अशोका के पीरियड में भी देखने के लिए मिलता है. राइट, ही टेक्स द टाइटल ऑफ देव नाम पियदस्सी. So in the case of India, even in highly centralized setups, the kings rely upon the divine origin of kingship, the divine theory of kingship to legitimize their role. And that is why क्या pattern emerge होता है Indian society में? There is always going to be an alliance between the priest and the prince. ठीक है? Priest-prince alliance is almost a permanent fixture of statehood in India. This is the reason why कि इनको कभी भी इंडिया में एक दूसरे से सेपरेट नहीं किया जा सकता है, जैसे कि बर्टनस्टाइन ने किया है. ठीक है, कैन वी टेक डाउन अ फ्यू वर्ड्स? लिखो. प्रोविंशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, अंडर दैट राइट डाउन द चोला एम्पायर was divided into several provinces. During the time of Rajaraj the First, there were 9 Chola provinces. ठीक है, provinces known as mandalams. Known as mandalams. Full stop. Next subpoint. Their administration was overseen by royally appointed viceroys or governors. Viceroys or governors. Next subpoint. In most cases, these were royal princes. These were royal princes. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. Each mandalam was subdivided into districts known as kottams or valnadus. Kottams or valnadus. Next main point. These were further subdivided into clusters of villages. Subdivided into clusters of villages known as kurram, kurrams or nadus. Kurrams or nadus. Next main point. The village or gram was the lowest unit of administration. Was the lowest unit of administration. Next main point. The Chola period coincided with the second urbanization of South India reaching its peak. Reaching its peak. Full stop. Subpoint. As a result, small towns known as nagarams emerged as market centers. Emerged as market centers serving a group of nadus. Serving a group of nadus. Full stop. They were governed by a local council of merchants and landed elites. नगरम की लेवल पे होता था नगरट्टार. known as the Nagarattar. काउंसिल ऑफ मर्चेंट्स एंड लैंडेड एलिट्स. तो यहाँ पे जो नगरट्टार में नगरम में जो ट्रेडर्स हैं विच आर कंडक्टिंग द ट्रेड बिटवीन द डिफरेंट नाडूज एंड सम ऑफ द लोकल एलिट्स विच आर प्रेवलेंट इन ईच ऑफ द नाडूज, दे आर गोइंग टू ऑर्गेनाइज द गवर्नेंस ऑफ दीज टाउन्स. ठीक है, दीज मार्केट सेंटर्स. तो नगरम में दिस काउंसिल कंपोज्ड ऑफ मर्चेंट्स एंड लोकल लैंडेड एलिट्स वाज नोन एज नगरट्टार. क्लियर? नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. at the nadu level comma power had traditionally been in the hands of local landed elites known as valiers. Elites known as valiers who were in charge of local administration including the assessment and collection of revenue. Including the assessment and collection of revenue. Full stop. Next next main point. Villages enjoyed a great degree of autonomy and were governed by village assemblies known as UR, UR or Sabha, UR और सभा. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. In other words, comma, the administration and political organization at the Gram, Nadu and Nagaram levels had evolved organically over a long time. Had evolved organically over a long time. Full stop. Subpoint. This translated to a high level of local autonomy. This translated into a high level of local autonomy. समझ में आया है ये? Next main point लिखो. However, strong centralizing tendencies became visible with the enhancement of royal authority. Not authority, royal power. Royal power. Strong centralizing tendencies became visible with the enhancement of royal power. Full stop. Subpoint. Raj the First conducted a survey of all lands and carried out large-scale political reorganization. Next subpoint. Revenue assessment no longer remained the responsibility of the local officials and a separate revenue department was set up to enhance revenue centralization. To enhance revenue centralization. Full stop. Next subpoint. The empire was reorganized into several provinces governed by several provinces governed by royal viceroys. Full stop. These received orders from the center regularly and took efforts to implement these orders. Next subpoint. Similarly, the Valanadu was introduced above the Nadus and Nagarams in order to supervise them. Next subpoint. Additionally, royal officials began periodically participating in village assemblies in a supervisory role. Next subpoint. Through the institution of land grants, comma, the kings heavily patronized Brahmins, thus cultivating a loyal support base at the local level to counterbalance the power of entrenched local elites. Next subpoint. The military encampment known as Nilai Padai was used to further curtail the power of local elites and enhance royal authority and enhance royal authority. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. Therefore, with the enhancement of Chola royal power, strong centralizing tendencies became visible at the lower levels of political organization. At the lower levels of political organization. ठीक है. Next main point. However, the level of centralization was never absolute. Full stop. One of the reasons behind this was the unique nature of social organization in the Deep South. Next subpoint. Subpoint. Unlike North India, the Southern society was characterized by a twofold Varna system. In fact, you should not write was characterized by, you should write was based on. The Southern society was based on a twofold Varna system characterized by based on a twofold Varna system characterized by the almost complete absence of Kshatriyas. The almost complete absence of Kshatriyas. ठीक है. Next sub point लिखो. As a result, the traditional Brahman Kshatriya alliance was not possible thus compelling the Brahmins to enter into an alliance with the local landed elites. over non-Brahmin. Over non-Brahmin. Full stop. Next subpoint. As a result, this section was transformed into a pillar of royal support alongside the Brahmins. Alongside the Brahmins. Pillar of royal support alongside the Brahmins. ठीक है? Next main point. Another outcome of the twofold Varna hierarchy was the push towards an accelerated process of caste proliferation. Of caste proliferation. Full stop. Within this, next subpoint. Within this, the need for sharper differentiation resulted in a rising gap between the right-handed or Idangai group and left-handed or Valangai group. Yes, the landed elites were the traditional large peasants. They were non-Brahmins primarily. Or new landed elites were the Brahmins. They were being given a lot of land grants. ठीक है? तो क्या लिखा है अभी? Within this were the left-handed groups or Valangai and the right-handed groups or Idangai. Sorry, Valangai. Now, next point likho. Next subpoint. एक मिनट. Let me see. Within this, the need for sharper differentiation resulted in a rising gap between the right-handed or Idangai group and left-handed or Valangai group. Next subpoint. Ultimately, this resulted in a rising social conflict. Which the Cholas were unable to contain. Full stop. This may have been one of the factors. That led to their ultimate decline. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो। Therefore, any inquiry into the level of centralization in Chola provincial administration is not going to lead, or is not going to yield a straightforward result. A straightforward result. Full stop. Rather, it would be better to perceive the evolution of Chola provincial administration, the evolution of the Chola provincial administration in different phases. कितने phases? चार phases primarily. ठीक है, यस। तो ये चार phases हमको देखने के लिए मिलते हैं। ड्यूरिंग phase 1, Chola provincial administration was characterized by almost complete autonomy. During phase 2, the Chola provincial administration was in a phase of transition. Transition towards centralization. During phase 3, the Chola provincial administration displayed high levels of centralization. And during phase 4, once again, transitory phase था, transition towards decentralization. ठीक है, लिख लीजिए इसको। So it can be perceived in the phase of evolution over different phases. These are the 4 phases. Phase 1, characterized by strong element of autonomy. Phase 2, transition towards centralization. Phase 3, high levels of centralization. And phase 4, transition towards decentralization. क्लियर है? इनफैक्ट जब हम डिबेट डिस्कस करेंगे ना, तो इफ अ क्वेश्चन अपीयर्स regarding the nature of Chola administration, regarding the nature of the Chola state, one of the important questions is whether the state was highly centralized or was it a segmentary state या फिर feudal state था, early state था, तो क्या था? तो एंड में हम कंक्लूड इसी पॉइंट पे करते हैं कि कोई एक डेफिनेशन नहीं है. इट वाज नॉट अ monolithic homogeneous history. There were long periods of evolution and हमें हमेशा इन चार फेजेस को अपने माइंड में रखना चाहिए. So either you can remember it like this or you can remember it like this in the form of this graph. And I would encourage you कि अपने आंसर्स में भी कम से कम ये टेबल तो यूज करना ही अगर ग्राफ नहीं यूज करते हो. It would be best if you could incorporate both. ठीक है? ग्राफ, तो ग्राफ में ये जो सेगमेंटरी स्टेट वाला है ये तो आप हटा दो, ये रियल रिचुअल वाला है. ये y एक्सिस पे सेंट्रलाइजेशन, x एक्सिस पे टाइम, एंड दिस इज द ग्राफ ऑफ रिलेटिव सेंट्रलाइजेशन. ठीक है? टेक डाउन अ क्वेश्चन. Trace the evolution of Chola provincial administration. In your view, did it exhibit a strong element of centralization? A strong element of centralization. $200 words, 15 marks. On which note should we begin the answer? क्या हमें शुरू में ही मेंशन करना चाहिए that Chola provincial administration was characterized by the element of evolution, या फिर उसको बाद के लिए बचा के रखना चाहिए? बाद के लिए बचा के रखना चाहिए. तो इंट्रोडक्शन कैसे करेंगे आप? how will you introduce? ये बोलोगे that Chola provincial administration received a concrete form during the reign of Raj Chola. It was a highly sophisticated and differentiated system which had emerged as the result of a combination of organic development and रॉयल प्रेरोगेटिव. ठीक है, तो अभी तक हमने इतने सारे आंसर्स डिस्कस किए हैं. वन थिंग दैट यू मे हैव नोटिस्ड इज कि मैं इंट्रोडक्शन में ही कोशिश करता हूं that I should be able to tell the examiner about some of the important things that we are going to elaborate in the coming portion. And iske through I am also trying to convince the examiner that I actually have functional knowledge of the topic under discussion. तो ऊपरी ऊपरी superficial knowledge नहीं है, थोड़ा depth में knowledge है. And I also want to use the introduction to function as a good diving board into the rest of my answer. तो अच्छा एक launch pad मिल जाता है. हमने यहाँ पे mention किया है it was highly sophisticated and well differentiated system and it was the result of organic development combined with royal prerogative. तो हमको अगर elaboration करना होगा तो इन्हीं features के ऊपर करना होगा, right? Now in the main body of the answer, what was the reason behind caste proliferation? Is there any link with urbanization? बताओ क्या होगा, क्यों caste proliferation हुआ होगा? कई सारे factors होते हैं. क्या? First of all, peasantization of tribes. Chola period was a period where expansion of agriculture was growing at a high rate. So a number of tribes were being incorporated into the mainstream society and there was a need to rank them. So in aid of that objective, the peasantization of tribes led to the proliferation of castes. As new tribes were incorporated into the mainstream society, उनको एक या दूसरी जाति या कास्ट का दर्जा दे दिया गया. ठीक है, और क्या फैक्टर? ग्रोइंग prosperity, right? So the availability of resources was increasing. लेकिन टेंडेंसी क्या होता है? रिसोर्स के एक्यूमुलेशन का, मैक्सिमाइजेशन ऑफ कंजम्पशन का. तो हमेशा ज्यादा अमीर सोसाइटीज में आपको क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? जैसे एज इंडिया इज ग्रोइंग, इट्स इकोनॉमी इज ग्रोइंग, व्हाट एल्स इज ग्रोइंग अलोंगसाइड इट? इनइक्वालिटी इज ग्रोइंग. ठीक है, तो प्रॉस्पेरिटी ऑलवेज ब्रीड्स अनइक्वल डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ रिसोर्सेज. एंड इस इनइक्वालिटी की वजह से क्या होता है? सोशल हार्मनी और सोशल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट. नाउ जो एलिट्स है सोसाइटी में, उनका ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है? कि ये इनइक्वालिटी को तो बढ़ाते रहो लेकिन इस कॉन्फ्लिक्ट को रिड्यूस कर दो. ठीक है, एंड हाउ टू डू दैट? हाउ टू अचीव दिस? ये जो नेचुरल प्रोसेस है इसको रिवर्स कैसे किया जा सकता है? हाँ, बाय assigning a particular rank to every individual or group within the society. ठीक है, तो रैंकिंग का फंक्शन कौन परफॉर्म करेगा? दी कास्ट सिस्टम. थर्ड फैक्टर, with the growth of prosperity, trade, commerce, other secondary economic activities such as craft production are also going to increase. Now, till the time the society was or the economy was largely agrarian, तो वहां पे it was easier to rank these people, right? जो producers हैं और जो consumers हैं, जो revenue को appropriate कर रहे हैं, उनके बीच में clear differentiation है. But ये इस process की वजह से some new groups are going to emerge within the society which do not fit into the traditional hierarchy. अब उनको उस traditional hierarchy में incorporate करने के लिए once again castes are going to be introduced. Clear? So these are the important factors behind the proliferation of castes. ठीक है सुदीप? ओके. हाँ, नाउ हम वो क्वेश्चन डिस्कस कर रहे थे. तो इंट्रोडक्शन में हमने क्या किन एलिमेंट्स के ऊपर फोकस किया है? highly differentiated system and that it was the result of a combination of organic development and royal prerogative. ठीक है, तो इन चीजों के बारे में हमें अब इलैबोरेशन करना है इन दी बॉडी. क्या बोलेंगे हम? सबसे पहले किसके बारे में बात करेंगे? The levels of political organization within the provincial administration. Mandalam, Valanadu, Nadu and ग्राम. तो इनके बारे में हमें एक एक लाइन लिखना होगा. राइट. फर्दर we are going to talk about the emergence of a new level. Nagaram. ठीक है. Now these three lower levels of provincial administration were the result of organic development. Characterized by high degrees of autonomy. ठीक है. However, this element of autonomy was not conducive to the enhancement of royal authority, which was the tendency of every powerful ruler, including the Cholas. And Cholas, beginning from Rajaraj I, responded with several tools to enhance centralization in provincial administration. First of all, through political reorganization, leading to the creation of Mandalam and Valanadu. ठीक है. अदर इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स ऑफ सेंट्रलाइजेशन क्या क्या यूज किए गए? लैंड ग्रांट्स, revenue centralization through the introduction of survey and measurement, use of military encampments, cantonments to suppress the military authority or military power of local elites. And the elaboration of the royal bureaucracy to encourage greater linkage between the higher and lower levels of administration. As a result, two cadres of royal officials emerged. कल नाम डिस्कस किए थे हमने, कौन कौन? Perundam or the higher officials and Tirutam or lower officials. They remained accountable to royal authority, and to enhance power of the king at the local levels, इनको पे कैसे किया जाता था? Land grants. Now, their land grants were the result of royal patronage. So it was in their interest to enhance royal authority at the local levels. अगर वो diminish होगा, तो their land rights may also become threatened, for example, right? तो ये use किया गया. Now we come to the second portion of your answer. In your view, did it exhibit a strong element of centralization or not? तो क्या लिखोगे आप? यस, मतलब यस नहीं लिखना है कि यस, स्ट्रॉन्ग centralizing tendencies were definitely present, but centralization was not absolute. One of the reasons, the twofold Varna system due to which the state was not in a position to completely replace the traditional elite with the new elite, Brahmins, right? And this necessitated a Brahmin Velar alliance. Okay? Now, the Velars were the rich peasants who were non-Brahmin, and in the Tamil society, ever since the emergence of the twofold Varna system, social tension had emerged between the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins. For a short duration of time, these groups, not the entirety of these groups, but the elites of the non-Brahmins entered into an alliance with the Brahmins. However, this alliance was only temporary in nature. Further, due to the proliferation of castes and the growing inequality, social conflict began growing. And once again, keeping with the pattern of social development in South India, this conflict manifested itself in the form of a conflict between Brahmins and non-Brahmins. Okay? So now the Vellalars figured that they would be able to remain in control, they would be able to enhance their authority by breaking this alliance and supporting the non-Brahmins against Brahminical exploitation. And this led to, first of all, the degradation of royal authority, followed by complete disintegration. ठीक है? And finally you come to the conclusion. Conclusion में किस नोट पे conclude करोगे? That any inquiry into the question of level of centralization is not going to yield a straightforward answer. The nature of Chola provincial administration was characterized by constant evolution, with historians having identified 4 phases. ठीक है? Therefore, the Chola provincial administration was highly centralized, but not this was not a permanent feature. ठीक है? वर्डिंग को आप चेंज कर सकते हैं to make it more effective, but the thought is going to remain the same. In this manner we can conclude. क्लियर है? राइट, ये हो गया चोला प्रोविंशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. अब क्या करना है? चोला लोकल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. Now, our chief source of information regarding village administration of the Chola period comes from a pair of inscriptions at which place? At Uttaramerur. These belong to the reign of Parantaka the first, dated to 973 and 975 CE. एक बार डेट्स को कंफर्म कर लीजिएगा, मुझे एग्जैक्टली याद नहीं आ रहा है, बट आई थिंक दीज आर दी वैलिड डेट्स. ठीक है? नाउ क्या मिलता है हमको इन इंस्क्रिप्शंस में? वी गेट अ वेरिटेबल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ चोला self-administering village assemblies. ठीक है? Now, from these inscriptions, it appears that these assemblies were not created through such inscriptions. ये already थे existence में, बस इनके कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को फॉर्मलाइज किया गया है. ठीक है? तो इट अपीयर्स दैट सच असेंबलीज had evolved over a long time. नहीं, परंत का दी फर्स्ट का देख रहे हो? नहीं नहीं, वो इंस्क्रिप्शंस का है, 923 और 975 है क्या? मुझे एग्जैक्टली याद नहीं आ रहा है इंस्क्रिप्शंस का। तो एक इंस्क्रिप्शन पहले बनाया गया था, एक इंस्क्रिप्शन 2 साल के बाद। वो एक्चुअली ये था कि यहाँ पे उत्तरा मेरूर में एक बड़ा सा टेम्पल था एंड उसके पास कई सारे विलेजेस सेटल्ड थे एंड उत्तरा मेरूर विलेज में कुछ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट चल रहा था रिगार्डिंग द फंक्शन एंड द कॉम्पोजिशन ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट। फाइनली द किंग हैड टू इंटरवीन एंड एक कमिटी वगैरह बैठाया गया एंड ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ द कंक्लूजन्स ऑफ दैट कमिटी एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को फाइनलाइज किया गया। 2 साल का ऑपरेशन हुआ, सम मोर प्रॉब्लम्स इमर्ज, तो उनको रिजॉल्व करने के लिए एक अमेंडमेंट आया। सो ये एक बेसिक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन और उसका अमेंडमेंट के फॉर्म में है एंड इन दो इंस्क्रिप्शन के थ्रू वी गेट मोस्ट ऑफ आवर नॉलेज अबाउट चोला सेल्फ गवर्निंग विलेज इंस्टीट्यूशंस। तो सच असेंबलीज had evolved over a long time and in the Uttaramerur inscription their constitution was simply confirmed. Now किस तरह का इंफॉर्मेशन मिलता है? We get information about the composition of the assemblies, the types of assemblies, the functions that the assemblies are expected to perform. We get information regarding the system of elections. We get information regarding qualifications. That candidates must have to be eligible. At the same time, we are also informed about certain disqualifications which prohibit a person from participating in the elections. We learn about the various committees which served the village assembly in different capacities, the tasks that these committees performed, इनके नाम पता लगते हैं. We also get a glimpse of the nature of the relationship between the center and the villages. ठीक है? Now, दो तरह के assemblies mentioned है. One is known as the ur, the other is known as the sabha. Apart from this, another assembly is mentioned, but that is not associated with village administration. That is associated with town administration. इसको बोलते हैं नगरट्टार. ठीक है? जो उत्तरामेरूर इंस्क्रिप्शंस हैं, they do not discuss the नगरट्टार. ये किसके बारे में बात करते हैं? उर और सभा के बारे में. सभा ऑल्सो नोन एज महासभा. What was Ur? Ur was the village assembly in charge of governing villages of non-Brahmins. ठीक है. Now Cholas gave extensive land grants to Brahmins and a number of Brahmadeya and Agrahara settlements emerged. Now those were governed by assemblies known as Sabha or Mahasabha. Now, when I say non-Brahmin village assemblies, this did not mean that in these course Brahmin participation नहीं होता था. देखो, चोला पीरियड में विलेजेस का कॉम्पोजिशन दो तरह से होता था. वन विच वर प्योरली ब्राह्मण सेटलमेंट्स, तो वहां पे केवल ब्राह्मण्स रहते थे. These settlements were known as Brahmadeyas or Agraharas, and others where mixed population used to live. Brahmins भी, non-Brahmins भी. तो mixed population वाले villages में the assembly was known as Ur, and pure Brahmin settlements में Sabha और Mahasabha. Now, the Uttaramerur inscription informs us that for the village of Uttaramerur, each and every year a village assembly of 30 councillors was elected to govern it for the coming year. They had a term of 1 year. Now, these members, these councillors represented each ward. So, the Uttaramerur village consisted of 30 wards and one councillor came from each ward. As a result, 30 wards से 30 councillors आते. Elections क्या बोला गया? They were supposed to be held annually, once every year. कहां पर? In the temple courtyard or by the embankment of the village tank. ठीक है, तो विलेज टैंक का जो वॉल है उसके बगल में या तो असेंबल हो सकते हैं लोग, और इन दी टेम्पल कोर्टयार्ड. हु हैज टू बी प्रेजेंट? Each and every person living in the village has to be present, and presence is mandatory. Even infants have to be present. केवल कुछ एक्सेप्शंस हैं कि मान लो डेथ बेड पर है या बहुत बीमार है या कहीं और गया हुआ है तो नहीं आ सकता है, तो दैट इज ओके, बट फॉर एवरीबडी एल्स दे मस्ट बी प्रेजेंट. ऑल रेजिडेंट्स मस्ट attend the elections. The elections must be conducted in the presence of all available टेम्पल प्रीस्ट्स. ठीक है, सारे टेम्पल प्रीस्ट के प्रेजेंस में होना चाहिए जो भी वहां पे अवेलेबल हैं. दिस वाज टू इंश्योर कि कोई धांधलेबाजी नहीं हो रही है, राइट? तो इलेक्शंस रिमेन फेयर. फर्दर द senior most of these priests is going to function as the mediator of the entire electoral process. And जो elections हैं actually they are going to be done not with popular voting but with a system of lots. लॉटरी निकाली जाएगी and this system of lottery was known as कुडोवोलाई. तो किया क्या जाएगा that let us suppose these are the different wards of the villages. हर ward से there are a certain number of candidates who want to represent that ward. कोई जरूरी नहीं है कि एक ही नंबर ऑफ कैंडिडेट्स होंगे. नाउ देयर नेम्स are going to be written on separate pieces of paper, separate leaves. ठीक है, तो names of all candidates were written on different leaves and bundled together. ठीक है, तो इस तरह से कितने बंडल्स बन जाएंगे टोटल? 30 वार्ड से तो 30 बंडल्स बन जाएंगे and all these 30 bundles are going to be placed inside a single pot. ठीक है, फिर इसके बाद क्या होगा? A small child is going to be brought forward and he is then going to reach into that pot and bring out a single bundle, right? और उसको ऐसे उसको पकड़ाना है मीडिएटर को, दैट मीडिएटर का हाथ ऐसे खुला हुआ है, ऑल 5 फिंगर्स आर ओपन, वो रखेगा. देन ही इज गोइंग टू ओपन इट इन फ्रंट ऑफ एवरीबडी. ही इज गोइंग टू देन प्लेस दिस अनबंडल्ड नेम्स इनटू अ सेपरेट पॉट. ठीक है, तो इन सिंगल पॉट्स में से वन पैकेट would be opened and placed in a separate pot. And once again what is going to happen? उसी बच्चे को बोला जाएगा that ये मान लो पहला वाला बंडल है तो इसमें कितने नाम होंगे? 4 नेम्स होंगे. वो पॉट में घुमाएगा हाथ and then he is going to pull it out. Once again मीडिएटर के हाथ में रखेगा. मीडिएटर इज गोइंग टू रीड द नेम ऑफ द पर्सन अलाउड and then he is going to pass the leaf to all the priests present over there. And उसका election confirm कब होगा? Only when all the priests present have given their consent. ठीक है, so in this way through a system of lots elections were done. क्वालिफिकेशंस किस तरह के थे? बट नॉन ब्राह्मण असेंबलीज में, उर्स में, ओनली दोज पीपल वर अलाउड टू पार्टिसिपेट हु ओन्ड अ सर्टेन क्वांटिटी ऑफ टैक्स पेइंग लैंड, 1/4 वेली ऑफ लैंड. ठीक है, तो सॉरी, हाँ, 1/4 वेली ऑफ लैंड. दिस वाज द क्वालिफिकेशन दैट हैज बीन मेंशन्ड. तो लैंड ओनरशिप और taxpayer status needed to be confirmed. Second, it was mentioned that only those persons who had their own residence on their own land, they were eligible to vote. Third qualification, the candidate must not be more than 70 years of age but not less than 35 years of age. तो एज restrictions भी थे 35 to 70 years in age. Another qualification, that the candidate must have knowledge of the Vedas. So at least one of the four Vedas and the Bhashyas on them they must know about. Right? तो essentially qualifications किस तरह के हैं? Property ownership, age and education. ठीक है? At the same time, certain people were disqualified. किस तरह के लोग disqualified थे? First of all, those who had served on any committee in the previous 3 years, they were not eligible to participate in the elections. तो हर टर्म के बाद, हर 1 year टर्म के बाद 3 साल का कूलिंग ऑफ पीरियड होता था, वेटिंग पीरियड होता था. सेकेंड, those who had served on any committee but had not submitted his or his family members account statements. ठीक है? तो अपने और अपने फैमिली मेंबर सच एज फादर, सन, ब्रदर, ब्रदर इन लॉ, सन इन लॉ, इन सब के अकाउंट स्टेटमेंट्स को पब्लिकली डाइवल्ज करना जरूरी था फॉर एनी पर्सन हु वाज सर्विंग ऑन एनी कमिटी. अगर मान लो कोई बना है बंदा ऐसा और उसने अपने अकाउंट्स को सबमिट नहीं किया है, then he would be not eligible, he would be disqualified from further consideration. Third, those who had been convicted of stealing property, those against whom outstanding criminal proceedings or criminal charges, unresolved criminal charges were placed, वो participate नहीं कर सकते. Those who had committed one of the 5 cardinal sins, तो sinners allowed नहीं थे. For example, those who had been charged with adultery or incest etc., तो वो नहीं allowed थे. And this included those who had been purified through some expiatory rites, through some purification rituals. So sinners, even though they had performed some purification rituals. ठीक है? This was the qualification and disqualification criteria broadly speaking. Now, एक चीज हमने मेंशन किया है that ये जो 30 काउंसलर्स थे, they were not responsible for individual functions. हाँ, they were representing their wards, but they were answerable to the entire village as a whole in their capacity as members of specific committees or variums. Variums were the executive committees of these village assemblies. कितने variums होते थे? Multiple variums, right? Their number was not uniform and their names, numbers, size, functions and tenures varied from one village to another. These committees were responsible for different activities such as maintenance of roads, public gardens and orchards, overseeing agriculture, assessing the quality of goods being sold, setting prices and irrigation, etc. ठीक है? Now, one question has emerged in the scope of these local self-governing assemblies is whether they could be considered as actually being democratic or not. थे या नहीं थे? To a certain extent, they were definitely democratic. So, nationalist historians primarily K.A. Neelkanth Shastri emphasized that they were highly democratic participation or membership of these assemblies was not based on any caste or varna based criteria, rather these were elected. Secondly, the process of election was highly open and participation of the entire village community was not only considered desirable but it was mandatory. Thirdly, they enjoyed a high degree of local autonomy. with little to no interference from upper levels of power. The kings respected their decisions as indicated by the Utramerur inscriptions. However, the nationalist perspective has come under criticism recently, and recent historiography has given a more balanced perspective regarding Chola village assemblies. They have said that while some democratic elements were present, the Chola village assemblies could not be defined as truly democratic in the modern sense. And this was because these assemblies consisted of or had a large number of undemocratic elements. बताइए किस तरह के अनडेमोक्रेटिक एलिमेंट्स दिखते हैं? एक तो कई सारे क्वालिफिकेशंस एंड डिस्क्वालिफिकेशंस है, उनके क्राइटेरिया कैसे हैं? प्रॉपर्टी एंड एजुकेशन बेस्ड. और साउथ इंडियन सोसाइटी एट दिस पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम वाज हाईली स्ट्रैटिफाइड. Much of the property and right to receive education was concentrated in the hands of the elites, Brahmins and the Velalars, right? बाकी जो groups हैं, they did not enjoy these rights. ठीक है? So property and educational qualifications resulted in the limitation of political access. ठीक है? और बताइए, how else was it undemocratic? Although everybody was present, did they actively participate in the electoral process? No, it was more a matter of luck. यहाँ पे instead of popular elections, lottery was used to choose candidates. ठीक है? Elected candidates नहीं थे, they were actually chosen candidates who were coming from a small pool of local elites primarily. How else could it be categorized as being undemocratic? Now, the very presence of an institution, an inscription such as the Utramerur inscription should give you a certain idea. क्या? Were these acting absolutely independently of royal control? No. So royal interference was always present. And basic nature of Chola monarchy कैसा था? Democratic? No, it was autocratic. It was despotic in nature. So they were not completely free from despotic Chola authority किस तरह से किंग्स एक्सरसाइज करते थे इनके ऊपर पावर? First of all, through royal officials who used to participate in these assemblies in a periodic manner. Secondly, by establishing guidelines on the basis of which these assemblies were supposed to function. So, in most cases, the assemblies could not introduce any local policy that was in contravention with the royal orders, royal policies. Thirdly, in times of emergency, the royal officials had the power to intervene. Fourthly, the introduction of the concept of dharma. So, Utramirur inscriptions में what is the justification that has been given for preparing a royally ordained constitution to protect dharma. और धर्मा को प्रोटेक्ट करने के नाम पर the kings could unendingly, unceasingly interfere in the local affairs. The king was also seen as the final arbiter of any disputes and the final arbiter of justice. The kings, in order to ensure that their rule in the core region of the Kaveri Valley, उन्होंने क्या किया? जो कावेरी वैली के विलेजेस थे वहां पे अपना डायरेक्ट कंट्रोल एस्टैब्लिश किया. तो वहां पे ये उर और महासभा एब्सेंट होते थे. These were present only in the non-core regions. तो कावेरी रिवर वैली के जो विलेजेस थे, they were under direct royal authority, direct royal control. तो वहां पे तो बिल्कुल नहीं एग्जिस्ट करता था. फोर्थली, फर्दर हम ये भी देखते हैं that the kings also gave the status of Tanayur to some of the villages. Now, Tanayurs were either the large villages or a group of villages, right, जो कि strategically या economically important थे, and their administration was supposed to be run differently from the ordinary villages. तो जितने भी इकोनॉमिकली या स्ट्रेटेजिकली इंपॉर्टेंट एरियाज हैं वो सारे के सारे अंडर डायरेक्ट रॉयल अथॉरिटी फंक्शन कर रहे थे. फर्दर, Brahmins were used in order to suppress the independence enjoyed by these assemblies. तो in most cases कौन लोग सर्व करेंगे in the assemblies? Brahmins सर्व करेंगे, and Brahmins are collaborators of the royal government, the royal institution. So that is why ये यहाँ पर they were not completely free from despotic Chola authority. ठीक है? तो can we characterize them as being highly centralized? Sorry, highly democratic? नहीं. So some elements of democracy were present, but the strong element of centralization was also visible. ठीक है? Now, there is another question in regards to the Chola self-governing villages, and that is the linkage between central and village administration. So how was it that the Chola rulers maintained their control in these autonomous units? तो यहाँ पे जो हमने पॉइंट्स डिस्कस किए हैं वही सारे यहाँ पे हमको डिस्कस करने हैं. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, इंटरफेरेंस थ्रू रॉयल ऑफिशियल्स. ठीक है? नाउ रॉयल ऑफिशियल्स इंटरफियर्ड ईदर डायरेक्टली और इनडायरेक्टली. Direct intervention through periodic control. So they were present in the village assemblies on special occasions such as elections. Okay? And indirect intervention through regular control, by exercising regular control. Now जो यहाँ पे बड़े लैंडलॉर्ड्स थे, लैंड ओनर्स थे, इंक्लूडिंग ब्राह्मण्स, they enjoyed superior rights over land and they had the authority to you can say in a sense sublet their land. That means allow other groups or individuals to cultivate their land and in return obtain an income from them. Okay? However, this subletting of land to any individual or community required the consent of two authorities. कौन कौन? एक तो जो लोकल विलेज असेंबली है उसका आपको परमिशन लेना पड़ेगा, साथ में जो यहाँ पे रॉयल ऑफिशियल प्रेजेंट है उसका परमिशन लेना पड़ेगा. ठीक है? दिस वाज वन इंस्ट्रूमेंट ऑफ सेंट्रल कंट्रोल ओवर द विलेजेस. Secondly, land grants to temples and Brahmins was used by the kings to alter the power dynamics at the local levels. The Brahmins emerged as a new elite in the village environment, thus exercising great degrees of power, and through their alliance with the central authority को local level पे transmit करने के लिए these land grants were very useful Brahmins के. ठीक है? Thirdly, some of the strategically or economically important sabhas or urs were given the status of tanayurs or separate assemblies, which were under direct royal control. Similarly, the villages of the Kaveri River Valley were also kept under direct royal control. Further, the Nadu and Nagaram level elites were kept in check through royal supervision by the introduction of a superordinate level of administration known as the Valnadu. Further, the Nilai Padais or the military cantonments were used by the rulers to enhance their authority over self-governing autonomous village units in newly conquered regions. Further, by promoting the temple cult and the Brahmanical domination of the society, the kings began to exercise a higher degree of ritual royal sovereignty. By promoting the temple cult temples themselves became large landowners, and as local centers of royal power. So apart from functioning as religious centers, playing an ideological role in legitimizing the power of the king, they also emerged as local administrative centers in some cases. Further, the Nagaram, which was initially dominated by a combination of local merchants as well as local landed elites, underwent a radical change with the rapid growth of urbanization. ठीक है? As the cities became larger and larger, इनमें से relatively more important कौन रहेगा? Relatively more powerful कौन बन जाएगा? नगरम जैसे जैसे बड़े होते जाएंगे, because of growing trade and commerce, merchants are going to become more and more important. ठीक है? Initially, they were local merchants, then they became regional merchants, and finally they are going to become international merchants. Powerful trade guilds are going to emerge, such as the Ayavol, Anjuvanam, Manigramam, Nanadesi, etc. Right? And with the entrenchment of these guilds, कौन सा प्रोसेस प्रमोट होगा? सेंट्रलाइजेशन का या लोकलाइजेशन का? सेंट्रलाइजेशन, इंटीग्रेशन का प्रोसेस. ठीक है? The trade guilds and the royal center are going to are going to get involved in a symbiotic relationship. उनके बीच में एक reciprocal relationship emerge हो जाएगा. The kings are going to support the trade guilds by reducing the internal tariffs and external customs. The guilds are going to promote a centralization politically because that would enhance the power of the kings, and जितना पावरफुल किंग होगा उतना ही अच्छा उन गिल्ड्स को प्रोटेक्ट कर सकता है, उनको प्रमोट कर सकता है. ठीक है? सो इट इज थ्रू दीज मीन्स दैट द किंग्स वर एबल टू मेंटेन effective linkage between central and village administration. Now, what was the role of these self-governed villages in Chola administration as a whole? Positive impact पड़ा या negative impact पड़ा? On the whole, they had a positive impact. कैसे? These were local forums where local grievances could be aired and resolved. अगर हाईली सेंट्रलाइज्ड लोकल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन होता तो ये रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी किसके ऊपर पड़ती? किंग के ऊपर पड़ती. बट सिंस दीज ग्रीवियंसेस आर बीइंग रेज्ड एंड रिजॉल्व्ड locally, the administrative burden is shared. ठीक है? तो रॉयल अथॉरिटी के ऊपर बर्डन कम है। सेकेंडली, अब इन नतीजों से कुछ लोग खुश होंगे, कुछ लोग गुस्सा होंगे, एंड वेयर आर दे गोइंग टू लुक टू वेयर आर दे गोइंग टू टर्न टू वेंट देयर फ्रस्ट्रेशन? इन दिस केस अगेन सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट। सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट का कोई रोल ही नहीं है इसमें, राइट? तो द सेंटर was also shielded from adverse reactions. ठीक है? एंड थर्डली, चोलाज ने इन लोकल सेल्फ गवर्निंग बॉडीज को कैसे सेटअप किया था, किस तरह से सेटअप किया था? जो क्वालिफिकेशंस और डिस्क्वालिफिकेशंस हैं उनकी वजह से एक काइंड ऑफ परमानेंस मिल गया था लोकल सोसाइटी को, इन विच एलिट्स वर ऑलवेज गोइंग टू बी Brahmins or the Vellalars, right? So the Chola village assemblies acted as local pillars of royal support because they had successfully been able to cement an alliance between the Brahmins and the Vellalars. ठीक है? तो on the whole, their impact on Chola administration was rather positive. अब ये बताओ, ये सारी चीजें लिखवानी है या फिर एक नोट दे दूंगा तो चल जाएगा, हैंड आउट दे दूंगा तो चल जाएगा? ठीक है, प्रीवियस वाला मैं आपको भेज दूंगा। प्रीवियस वाला आप मेरे को एक बार बताओ कि कौन कौन से टॉपिक्स रहते हैं। लास्ट का हैंडआउट कौन सा था? हैंडआउट्स मेरे पास ज्यादातर बन चुके हैं तो मैं भेज दूंगा आपको। हर्षवर्धन वगैरह वाला मिल गया था? नहीं, पोस्ट मॉडर्न के बाद से गुप्ता मिला हुआ? एक बार मैं देख लेता हूँ कि कौन कौन से मिल रहे हैं। हर्षवर्धन वगैरह के हैंडआउट नहीं मिले हैं? गुप्ता और पोस्ट मॉडर्न का मिला, एक बार देखो। ठीक है, तो गुप्तास के बाद से मतलब भेजना है आपको। एक्चुअली वो नंबरिंग में गलत हो गया है शायद, पोस्ट मॉडर्न पहले होना चाहिए था, गुप्तास बाद में आना चाहिए था, तो 8 और 9 उल्टा होना चाहिए था। हाँ, तो वो कुछ कोई बात नहीं है, वो ऑर्डरिंग में थोड़ा हेराफेरी हो गई है। हाँ, लास्ट वाला गुप्तास ही मिला हुआ है, गुप्तास के बाद वाले भेजना। आई विल बी सेंडिंग दोज टू यू। फॉर नाउ आई एम एंडिंग दिस क्लास। कोई डाउट्स हैं तो प्लीज लेट मी नो। अच्छा, गुप्तास के कुछ PYQs डिस्कस कर दीजिए। तो ठीक है, एक बार ये वाला टॉपिक खत्म हो जाए, गुप्तास के PYQs भी डिस्कस कर लेंगे जो प्रॉब्लमैटिक्स वाले हैं। ठीक है, चलिए देन, थैंक यू गाइज।